Okay, well, good morning to all, and as always, thank you for this privilege to teach. We are in Mark chapter 14. I hope everyone read your homework and thought about the two questions we're going to discuss. Uh, this chapter is a classic example of how brief and succinct and fast-moving the Gospel of Mark is. Let me just read to you all that we're going to encounter uh, in this chapter. Jesus will be anointed for burial. Judas will betray him. He and his disciples will share in the last meal. He will predict Peter's denial. He will pray in the Garden of Gethsemane. He will be betrayed by Judas and arrested. And he will stand before the Sanhedrin in a mockery of a trial. And we will experience Peter's denial of him. All of that, just one right after the other. So it's fast moving. So let's see if we can keep up with it. Verses 1 and 2, this is going to be a story about a woman who anoints Jesus with perfume. It was now 2 days before Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. Those are two of the most important festivals or memorials uh, for the Jews. We'll talk about that more here in just a second. The leading priests and teachers of religious law were still looking for an opportunity to capture Jesus secretly and kill him, but not during the Passover celebration, they agreed, or the people may riot. Remember, during the Passover, the city of Jerusalem could swell to almost 1 million people. They couldn't all stay there. They had to stay in the surrounding towns and villages. There was many of them that were just 2, 3 miles away. They were within walking distance. Let me remind us real quickly about the festival of unleavened bread. It began the day after Passover and lasted for 7 days. During those days, Jews were supposed to eat bread that had no yeast in it, reminding them that when God told them that it was time to leave Egypt, he said now, and they were to do it in haste, not to look back. And so the festival of unleavened bread is a reminder that obedience is not convenient, but it is necessary to be in the will of God. An important principle for us all to remember today. Passover was the most important feast of all. For 1 month prior, every rabbi taught about it so that no Jew would be unlearned about it. All roads and bridges were repaired to symbolically uh, prepare for the coming of the King of Kings, the Messiah. And it was the dream of every Jew to celebrate Passover at least one time. Wherever they were in the world, they would save up money for it, make time for it to go and celebrate Passover. That's how important it was. When you know that Passover commemorated God's deliverance of God's people from Israel, um, that was the final plague. God said he was going to send. This one is a tough one to understand, at least for me. May not be for you. I'm going to ask you to give some input here in a little bit, and I'd love your thoughts. And when I ask you these questions, remember there's no right or wrong. I just want you to share your wisdom. God told the people of God, uh, the Jewish people, that he was going to send a death angel through that area. And they were to kill a lamb. They were to take the blood of the lamb and they were to sprinkle it on the sides of the door and the top of the door, not on the foot of the door, not on the floor of the door, because the blood of the lamb, symbolizing the Lamb of God who was to come, was too precious to ever be trod upon. Now, when that death angel came through and it saw the blood, it passed over that house. and therefore we get the name of the Passover, which brings us to our first question of the day. Um, every church I've ever been at, it's always been my joy to teach either all of confirmation or parts of it. And one question, surprisingly, that came up about out of my 40 years, it came up about every 3 or 4 years. And it always came from a child who lived in a home where the Bible was taught to them and they knew the story of the Ten Commandments. And they would ask me right in front of the other kids, why did God kill those innocent children? The innocent children of the Egyptians. You remember Pharaoh's firstborn son died, and there's no telling how many other hundreds or thousands also perished. And that was by the hand of God. So I would like to hear from you. Why do you think God did that?
Ricky, Ricky,
Yes,
over here. Hey, just talk.
This is Vicky.
Hello, can you hear me?
yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Ricky.
Okay. Here's my humble response to that. I don't know if I'm right or not, but one thing, I don't think that God really, really wanted to do that. He loved those children too, but he felt like there was no choice. I mean, all these other things, Moses kept trying to get his people out and let Pharaoh let the river let them out. Well, so another part of that story is the firstborn would be the one that would take over for the father. So whatever the father did as the ruler of the household, the firstborn would take over and do that too. So he kind of cut it off, that legacy or whatever, so that wouldn't go on. And apparently it worked. They got out. I don't know if that's the right answer or not, but that's my take on it.
Well, that's a good take. Yes. So, Vicky, part of what you're saying, and tell me if I'm misunderstanding this, is it was the parents' decision that affected the children. If they had repented, if they had chosen to obey God, then that would have not happened to their children.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's a great thought. Others on Zoom and in the classroom.
I was kind of thinking along the same line, as far as God saying, so here's what I'm telling you to do. Those that believe in me and do what I'm telling you to do, this calamity is not going to befall your son. Don't worship, or if you don't believe what I'm telling you, if you don't believe in me, you're going to lose your son. So it's almost like a test of if you believe in God or didn't you. People that worship false gods fell by the wayside.
Okay, Les, good thought. Thank you.
Well, God says somewhere that he doesn't want those kinds of sacrifice. He doesn't want that blood sacrifice. Required it because they were so out of control in a lot of cases.
Okay. Great. Phyllis, did I see you raise your hand?
Yes, this is maybe a little bit off base, but it's something I like to think about. You know, God had, if you go back and you read that whole story of those plagues, God had shown himself to those people over and over and over again. And that was not his first choice, as some of the rest of you have said. Could it be that God rescued those children from an evil place with evil people, and he rescued those children, and they went home to be with him, to be united with him? Because I just have a hard time believing that God doomed those children to death without life with him.
I like that. I like that. That's excellent.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll wrap it up by saying that I know you've read and heard that the younger generation, the those that are in their 20s down to college and high school are leaving the church in droves. And one of the questions they have that we need to be able to answer, and for example, to explain to our grandchildren, there's a lot of blood and gore and violence in the Old Testament. And we need to be able to answer that and explain that to our grandchildren. Okay. All right, let's move on. Verses 3-9. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany. I think I just mentioned to you that not everybody could stay in Jerusalem. Bethany's about 2 miles away. It was the home of Peter, Paul, or Mary. No, I'm kidding. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. So it was close enough for Jesus and his disciples to walk back and forth. And they were at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. Now, this would be a great scene from a movie. Here's a guy who used to be a leper. He was an outcast. He everywhere he went, he had to cry out, unclean, unclean. And so people could keep a certain amount of distance from him. No one could come into his home. He was the lowest of the lowest. But now he's been healed. Now, so you have to ask yourself, at least I do, has Jesus healed him? Is this why he's invited Jesus into his home? Well, we can just think about that. So remember now, when they ate at a meal like this, and it would only be men, a woman had to be married or could not be in a setting like this. Sometimes it was inside, sometimes it was outside in a courtyard, and they reclined kind of like on a lounge chair. And so that's what this looks like. This group of people, we don't know how many there are, when all of a sudden the camera shifts and a woman came in with, now this is a loaded sentence I need to break down for you, a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume made from essence of nard. So it's alabaster. Now, these days, the only place you could get alabaster was Egypt. So that made it expensive. By the way, there was a trade route that came across from Egypt. There was another one that came down the Mediterranean Sea, and they joined in an area that's pretty close to what we would call northern Israel or southern Lebanon. And then that trade route went all the way into India. So she has an alabaster jar, just not a common alabaster jar, but a beautiful and therefore expensive alabaster jar. What's in it? Expensive perfume made from essence of nard. Now, nard came from India. That made it expensive. So, and we're going to read here in a little bit just how expensive what this perfume was worth. So in this woman comes, it appears she's by herself. It does not mention a husband. So that is scandalous for a woman, not with a man, not even a brother, to come into a setting with a group of men. And then what is she going to do? I'm sure everyone stopped and looked at her. And again, we don't know if they're inside the house and she somehow just opened the door and came in. Maybe they're in a courtyard and she came in through an opening or a gate. She broke open the jar, and that breaking open, that's translated two different ways. One is that she would just have broken it at the neck, as if to say, this is never going to be used again for anything other than what I'm using it for right now. Another way it's interpreted is she just, to break it open means she opened it. She broke the seal on it and opened it from the top. And she poured the perfume over his head. Now, again, it was a scandalous thing to do. All the men are looking at Jesus like, who is this woman? Do you know this lady? Why are you allowing her to do this? And so now we start getting their responses. Some at the table were indignant. Why waste such expensive perfume, they said. It could have been sold for a year's wages and the money given to the poor. A year's wages, just for the common service industry worker today, let's say $20,000-$30,000 a year. So that was that lady's life savings. That was her nest egg. That was her financial net, so to speak. And she has just poured it all on Jesus, given it all away. And they're criticizing. That money could have been given to help the poor. Now, when I read that, I want to die laughing, because my thought is, it's pretty convenient to be judgmental about how people spend their money when it's not yours. To what ministries they invest their time and energy into when it's not yours. We have to be very careful that we don't fall into that trap and become judgmental like that. So they scolded her harshly. These men, she's just a woman, by the way. Remember, women are property. They're chattel. They're no different than a cow or a piece of a land. So they began to talk down to her, and they scolded her harshly. But Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. Why criticize her for doing such a good thing to me? How can it be a good thing? You will always have the poor among you, and you can help them whenever you want to. And the church has a responsibility to take that on as a ministry. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could do and has anointed my body for burial ahead of time." Now, in the Middle East, it was common upon death for the body to be washed and to be bathed. And then, depending on how much wealth you had, you put spices and perfume on the body, and then you wrapped it with strips of linen, which would create the shroud that we've heard about. So she's doing that ahead of time. Now, I don't want to chase a rabbit here, so I'm just going to throw out this thought. Had God just told her to do that? Had God told her that, look, Jesus is going to die and you need to prepare his body? What was her motivation? Hang on to that thought. We're going to get to it here. She has done what she could do and has anointed my body for burial ahead of time. I tell you the truth. Oh, Peter remembered this, and he told it to Mark. And he told Mark, you be sure you write this down. Wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed. And what was her deed? Extravagant generosity. Not just being generous, but extravagant generosity. Giving away probably the great majority of her wealth to serve her Lord. We can only assume she saw Jesus as Lord. So now let me get down to a question, and I want your feedback. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. Just everybody always has great wisdom. Uh, I'm assuming, and I could be wrong here, but I'm assuming that for this lady to make such a generous gift, this act of extravagant generosity directly to Jesus, that Jesus must have done something for her. And this is her response to what he has done for her. Now, let's just assume I'm right about that. What do you think it was?
Could it been because it's Mary that did this, the sister of Lazarus? Do we know what happened in that story? Unless I have my stories all wrong, I think it was Mary that poured the perfume. Is that correct? And so, pardon? I'm sorry.
I think that's two different stories.
Okay, but it sounds like all the same things.
Yeah, they're very similar.
Yes. Was it Mary that did this?
This is,
Or am I on a wrong story?
Vicky, there's a very similar story to where Mary does something very similar. And I think, and Bill, you may want to jump in here. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I think they're two different stories. And Bill, what do you think? Oh, we can't.
the wording is very similar.
There we go. I was muted, so I didn't cough in the middle of your lesson. I think you're right on, and I think traditionally, at least, they're two different times.
Okay. So Vicky, it was a good thought. So, but let me ask others, what do you think? What do you think Jesus had done for this woman that would move her to such an extravagant response?
Ricky, this is Cheryl. We recently did a study on Jesus and women throughout the Bible. And one of the things they kept making a point about was that, women, like you said, had a lower standing in society and were often treated with disrespect. And I kind of take that as she knew ahead of time, if you contrast how he was treated on the cross and how he was treated for truth, killed, that she was showing great belief and gratitude for how Jesus stood up for women as people, and that was her show of faith to him for his kindness and the kind of God she would want to worship, not in a society where you're treated horribly and subdued, that she gave extravagantly because it came from her heart about how Jesus impacted her in a society where it was great peril to him. That's
Okay.
how I see her faith. Anyway.
Cheryl, thank you. That's a great thought. It's been said that Jesus in the New Testament, those two have done more to elevate the worth of a woman than any other thing in history, any other movement. So that's a great thought. Anyone else?
Okay, Ricky,
Yes.
I'm still confused because when I read this, in my Bible, it's a study Bible. So below it said Mark 14:3. It talked about Bethany's located at the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives. This town was the home of Jesus' friend Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, who were also present at this dinner. The woman who anointed Jesus' feet was Mary, Lazarus and Martha's sister. An alabaster jar was a beautiful and expensive carved vase. Nard was expensive perfume. Matthew and Mark placed this event just before the Last Supper, while John placed it a week later, just before the Jesus' entry back in the city. It was to remember that the main purpose of the gospel writers was not to present an exact chronological account of Jesus' life, but to give an accurate record of this message. So that's where I'm getting that from.
Well, that sounds very convincing, and you may be onto something. So I tell you what, this afternoon I'm going to do a little research and get back to you. Phyllis?
It's the same thing.
When I was preparing Holy Week in real time, the kind of devotional I wrote for Holy Week, where you could read the passages of scripture, there was discrepancy there. And I'm like Vicky, I was a bit confused, and I did a good bit of reading, but a lot of the commentaries that I read, they tend to think it was maybe two different events. But to get to your question, whatever Jesus did, he gave this woman hope. Kind of writing on what Cheryl said, he gave her hope for something better, something of more eternal value than what she had.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Bill?
I think you could be pretty sure that what Jesus did for her is that almost all of the records of Jesus' activities were designed to do one, to relieve suffering, but also to fulfill prophecy, or another way of saying it, to prove that he truly was the Son of God, that what he was doing changed people's lives like they said the Son of God would do. So, what did he do? He usually did physical healing. Sometimes he did, so everybody could see it, that there was a great change. Sometimes he did spiritual healing. They were free. They had a new spiritual change. So there was a great change and people could see it. They used to be a mean old dog, and now he's a really fine person. And sometimes he did some kind of emotional thing, but always there was a great visible change that people could see. So more than likely, I think you could say pretty safely, Jesus didn't do some little something on the side that nobody noticed. He always made a great change. So whatever it was, this woman had been changed radically, and everybody knew it, and she wanted to express her gratitude.
Okay. And Vicky, back to you. Again, that's very convincing. Great thought. So I'm gonna do a little work this afternoon and tomorrow, and I'll get back not only to you but the entire class, because I love it when we come up with things like this. I'm no authority, and you may have found something that changes the way I think about the Bible. So this is exciting. Anyone else? Any other thought?
Say, this Ann, well, in the one part we read in Mark, it says they were at the home of this Simon the leper.
Yeah.
And in John, chapter 12, when it does say Mary anointed him, they were in the home of Lazarus. So they're talking about apparently two different houses.
Well, but that was when she did his feet.
Yeah.
Right.
She washed his feet at Lazarus and her and Martha's house.
Yeah.
But it could be the
She
same.
washed his feet with her hair.
It's just a-
Yeah, I mean, we don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
See, this is so exciting to me to know how much y'all read the Bible and how well you are.
That's it.
Way to go, Vicky. Stop the teacher.
Yeah, stump the teacher. Y'all are doing it. That's great. Great. Okay, so we're moving on now.
Anything else?
What?
Can I say something real quick?
Sure, sure.
It's going the very opposite of here is Judas, who thinks he's the treasurer of the group, right? And he's going to embezzle this money. And he thinks that Jesus is going to be the ruler, the king, and all of a sudden he finds out he's not going to be. And oh boy. Well, here's the woman, whoever she is, and has done the very opposite. She's given up everything probably that she had to show her love and her belief in him. I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting study together.
Yes, and thank you for saying it just like that, because you have just provided the perfect segue from this beautiful, wonderful story of extravagant generosity to what's coming next. And that's Judas is going to agree to betray Jesus. We go from this beautiful story to one of the most horrific acts of betrayal in history. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Mark set them back to back to make them look even more extreme and shocking. For the people of Jesus' day, when they read about a woman coming in to where there's a group of men and she's not accompanied by a man, that's scandalous. But it turns out to be a good thing, a thing that Jesus praises. And now we're about to talk about how Judas, one of his 12, is going to agree to betray him. How equally shocking that is going to be, but with negative consequences. Verses 11 and 12, then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests. Now, the leading priest, that would be the Sanhedrin. Remember, that was that group of 72 men that functioned basically like our Supreme Court. Why did he go there? To arrange to betray Jesus to them. He goes to them, in essence, to say, let's talk, let's make a deal. They were delighted when they heard why he had come, and they promised to give him money. Grease that palm just a little bit. So he began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Looking for an opportunity. That tells us that this was not something done in a moment of rage or passion. Judas was very cold and strategic and calculated about this. He makes up his mind how to do this step by step, and he begins by going to the Sanhedrin, and he works a deal with them. He's going to get money in return, and then he's still looking for an opportunity. So we're going to see that hours and a day or two go by where Judas could have changed his mind. He could have repented, but he refuses to do it. Now, I want to throw in something here that you may have heard about, you may have not, but there is a school of thought. It's not very large, but that there are some people that think that the reason Judas betrayed Jesus was to, in essence, force his hand, that to keep Jesus from dying, that he would betray him, and when the time for arrest came, that Jesus would then pull out his divine powers, so to speak, and he would at that moment overthrow the religious leaders and the Romans and establish the kingdom of heaven at that time. So that's why Judas did that. Personally, I don't see that, don't agree with that, but I just threw that out just so you'll know, in case you run into someone who thinks that way, and two of y'all can discuss it. So let's get on now to what's referred to as the Last Supper or the last meal. And it's so because it is the last time that Jesus and his disciples are going to share a meal together. It's the Passover meal. Let me begin reading these passages. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go to prepare the Passover meal for you?" You got to have a place. If you've ever been part of the Jews for Jesus Passover meal where they explain the symbolism, you know that the Passover meal takes a large table. It's very elaborate. There's a lot of different types of food there. It's not something you just throw together at the last minute. So Jesus sent two of them into Jerusalem with these instructions. As you go into the city, a man carrying a pitcher of water will meet you. Follow him. At the house he enters, say to the owner, the teacher asks, we'll get in that in a second, look for a man carrying a pitcher of water. Now, people always wonder, at least I do, did Jesus foresee this? Or had he already planned this? Was it already arranged? Hold that thought. We're going to get farther down into it. At the house he enters, say to the owner, the teacher asks, where is the guest room? Your translation may say upper room. That basically means it was a two-story house. Picture a large box as the first floor, a smaller box as the second floor. You can have access to that second floor, which was one large room usually. It was like a guest room. You could access it by stairs by the outside. Typically, it was used so when people came to visit, you had room for them, and also for rabbis to have a place to teach their disciples. Remember, in Jerusalem, there was dozens of rabbis other than Jesus. So this is a place of affluence. And so they're going to eat upstairs. As I said, some translations refer to this as the upper room. And there are some historians, some scholars think that this upper room is the same place where Pentecost occurred. You can't prove it or disprove it, but it's a very interesting thought. Where's the guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples? He will take you upstairs to a large room that is already set up. So remember, it's a man carrying water. That was a woman's job. It was below a man's dignity to take that large pot, go to the well, and get water for the day and carry it back. So just the fact that it's a man carrying water, it's going to be pretty easy to pick out in a crowd. And also the Passover meal's already prepared. This is not just a spur of the moment. So my question here, and then let me explain why. Did Jesus just foresee this? Could he supernaturally see that tomorrow there was going to be a man carrying a pitcher of water and he would have a Passover meal already set up? Or had Jesus already talked to that person? Or had someone else talked to that person to have it set up? Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from the divine and miraculous ability of Jesus, but I do want to remind us that he was human just like us. And he had to plan his days and his future days just like we do. So here's an example that if it is the case that he was planning ahead, it's a good role model for us. It's a good discipline for us to plan our days and the days ahead. All right, so the two disciples went into the city and found everything just as Jesus had said, and they prepared the Passover meal there. All right, now we'll go on down to verses 17 through 19. In the evening, Jesus arrived with the 12. Go back, picture it's a movie. Here comes Jesus. He's got 12 disciples in tow, and they're going up the stairs, which are on the outside, and they're going into that guest room, that upper room. And as they were at the table eating, Jesus said, "Man, hasn't the weather been great for Passover?" No, Jesus said, "Have you ever seen so many people at Passover? This is the biggest crowd I can ever remember." You remember it's a moment of communion. It's a moment of deep fellowship. And the bond is growing closer. And all of a sudden, Jesus drops this bombshell. I tell you the truth. Now, that was a rabbinical saying. Listen up. I'm going to tell you something I want you to remember. One of you eating with me here will betray me. Boom. Can you imagine the President of the United States sitting with his entire staff, from Secretary of State to Secretary of the Interior to Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Defense? They're all gathered around this huge table together, and they've been talking. They've been talking about the situation in Ukraine, and then in Gaza, and then events at home. And then all of a sudden, the president says, "One of you is going to assassinate me." Can you imagine what a bombshell that would be? That they would all be staring at the president as if to say, is that what, did I really hear what I thought I just heard? Well, if so, who's it going to be? Greatly distressed, each one asked in turn, each one, all 12. That means Judas, boy, what a great actor he must have been, as if to say, "Lord, am I the one?" Boy, he faked that so well. And also, it tells us that the other disciples didn't have a clue that it was going to be Jesus. They had no idea. Verses 20 and 21, and I see we're running out of time here, but Jesus replied, "It is one of you 12 who was eating from this bowl." Part of the Passover there was a bowl with olive oil. There was 3 loaves of bread. You would break bread from all 3 of those loaves, and then you would pass this common bowl of olive oil around, and everyone would dip in it, eat together, saying, "We are like one family, one body." We see that played out in Corinthians, many members, but one body. For the Son of Man must die. You see, at this point, Jesus, this is one of those marvelous moments where there's no middle ground with this guy called Jesus. He thinks he's the Messiah. That means he is, or he's a nutcase, or he's a cult leader. But he believes very clearly that for the Son of Man must die, as the scriptures declared long ago. Jesus is saying, "I am the Messiah." And to fulfill prophecy and to be in the will of God, I will have to die. Now, what do you do with a person like this? You can't write them off and just say, "Well, they were a really good person, a really good teacher, really left a great influence, did some good deeds." You either have to take them at face value and believe that Jesus really is Lord, really is the Messiah, or be an agnostic, an atheist, and say, look, Jesus was just crazy. It would be, but how terrible it will be for the one who betrays him. It would be far better for that man if he had never been born. And we know the outcome of Judas, how he ended his life. So, Ralph, I'm looking at the clock here. I see it's my laptop says 10:28. I think I'm just going to wrap it up right here, and we will pick it up at verse 22, chapter 14 and verse 22.